What do we learn about the temple music in the Old Testament? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 1 Chronicles on Walking Through the Bible.
His word, the glory of His cross.
Today we're going to be discussing 1 Chronicles chapter 25, verses 1 to 7. Before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 25, verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Chronicles chapter 25, beginning at verse 1. Moreover, David and the captains of the army separated for the service some of the sons of Asaph, of Heman, and of Jeduthun, who should prophesy with harps, stringed instruments, and cymbals. And the number of the skilled men performing their service was, of the sons of Asaph, Zachar, Joseph, Nethaniah, and Asrieliah. Of the sons of Asaph were under the direction of Asaph, who prophesied according to the order of the king. Of Jeduthun, the sons of Jeduthun, Gedaliah, Zeri, Jeshiah, Shimei, Hashabiah, and Matthiah, 6 under the direction of their father Jeduthun, who prophesied with a harp to give thanks and to praise the Lord. Of Heman, the sons of Heman, Bukiah, Mathaniah, Uzziel, Shebuel, Jeremoth, Hanani, Eliathah, Gedaliah, Romatiezer, Josh Bishaka, Molothai, Hothir, and Mahazioth. All these were the sons of Heman, the king's seer, in the words of God to exalt his horn. For God gave Heman 14 sons and 3 daughters. All these were under the direction of their father, for the music in the house of the Lord with cymbals, stringed instruments, and harps for the service of the house of God. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman were under the authority of the king. So the number of them with their brethren who were instructed in the songs of the Lord, all who were skillful, was 288. We've been looking at the organization of the temple and temple worship that was made during the reign of King David. Part of the organization of this worship is not only who would do what, but when they would serve in the temple of the Lord. What we found is that in general, the priests and Levites were divided into 24 divisions that would each serve 1 week from Sabbath to Sabbath in the temple. Thus, if you looked at their work over an entire year, each division would work for at least 2 weeks a year. It's not that they then got the rest of the year off, for there was work for them to do at home. It's just they wouldn't have to be in Jerusalem away from their families working in the temple of God. The divisions were not chosen by David or even the high priest. They were chosen by lot, meaning that God was the one who ultimately made the choice. This would reduce the likelihood of charges of favoritism by one family or another, or reduce the likelihood of disagreements that might have arisen due to the family rivalries. Having covered the divisions of the priests and the general divisions of the Levites at large, we now move to discuss the divisions of the musicians. Back in chapter 6, we were introduced to the 3 main families that would lead the temple music worship. From the family of Gershon, you had Asaph. From the family of Kohath, you had Heman. And from the family of Merari, you had Ethan, who is referred to here in chapter 25 as Jeduthun. But just like it was with the priests, where we could think that they were a small group when in fact they were large, we can also think that the musicians were also a small group, since initially 3 were chosen. But yet again, we would be wrong, for the children of these 3 men would also be involved in the temple music, as would their children, and later on their children, and so on. In fact, at the writing of this book, there were 288 skilled singers and musicians for the temple worship of the Lord. And as such, all of them wouldn't be present at the temple worship at the same time. They too would be made into divisions. We'll see the actual divisions, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. For now, let's just know that they existed. Before closing, let's note a couple of things about the temple music in the Old Testament. First of all, the temple music contained instrumental music for harps, stringed instruments, horns, and cymbals are specifically mentioned in this passage. Why is this worth noting? Because when we get to the New Testament and the music worship of the church, not one instance of instrumental music is found, only unaccompanied a cappella vocal singing. Sure, people like to come to passages like these and ones in the Psalms to try and find that authority, but let's remember, Christ brought the law of Moses to an end at the cross. Our study of Romans taught us that we have died to the law, which means the whole law, so that we can be married to Christ and his new covenant law. We cannot say we'll give up animal sacrifices made under the law, but keep the temple music arrangement simply because we like instrumental music in worship to God. If God wanted Christians to use instrumental music in worship to him, the apostles would have written that down, just as the chronicler and later the psalmist did for those under the old covenant. But the apostles didn't write any such thing down, so we cannot say that God approves of such today. We can only say he approves of unaccompanied singing from the heart. Why might God have changed? I don't know on that one, and wouldn't presume to speak for God, but the difference between musical worship in the Old and New Testament is striking and should be respected by Christians today. The second thing of note is that these musicians were known as prophets. That means that their songs were actually inspired of God and taught the people about the truths of God. We should have known this to be true because we possess the book of Psalms, which are a collection of some of these inspired psalms. Thus, these singers weren't simply writing hymns like our hymn writers do today. They were penning the words of God that would not only bring God glory when sung by his people, but would teach them more about God in the process. These songs would have therefore been free of doctrinal error, unlike some of our songs today. And when we get to our study of the book of Psalms, we're going to see not only how talented these singers were, but what profound truths about God that we can learn that we might not have completely understood before. We'll continue our look at the division of the temple musicians, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Chronicles chapter 25, verses 8 to 31, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.